even here with the tie in the back, I think, somewhere. And I am very pleased to be able to welcome you all to this special presentation with our guest who I'll mention in a minute. I'm also pleased that the BC Civil Liberties Association and the tie have been able to get together on affording this as an opportunity that members of the public can come along and hear about an issue that is of great importance to us all. Our guest tonight is Dr. Michael Geist. He has a distinguished background. He is the foremost authority in Canada on copyright law. His background includes obtaining not just one law degree, which is enough of an achievement, I should say. That came from Osgood in 1992, but he also followed that up by Masters of Law degrees from Cambridge and from Columbia, and then a doctorate in law at Columbia. He has gone on to an academic career, and he currently holds the position of Canada Research Chair in Internet and E-Commerce Law at the University of Ottawa Faculty of Law. And many of you will be familiar with him from his many contributions in articles in the press and articles that he's written in books, but also he has written Internet Law in Canada and in the public interest, the future of Canadian copyright law. Without further ado, if I can introduce Michael to you, and I'll invite him to give you the address that he's prepared. Thank you.
Well, thanks very much, and thanks for the invitation, and also thanks to all of you for both coming out and then hanging out a little bit as we dealt with technical issues, which I'm afraid persist. So usually I present with PowerPoint. Tonight I'm going to, or keynote, I guess it happens, but tonight I'm going to test myself, I guess, by talking without it, although you might see me glance a little bit through so I can follow through. So the title of the talk is, as I hope you know, is What the Canadian Copy Fight Teaches Us. And where I actually wanted to start was with the copyright consultation that just took place over this past summer. Hopefully many of you are aware of it and may have participated. And in particular, there was a press release that came out very early on from Access Copyright, one of the large copyright collectives. And it was at a time when everybody was trying to get their members or their interests to ensure that they would participate in the consultation. And Access Copyright said this as part of the release that went out to its members. It's a simple fact. It's a simple fact that users outnumber us. But Canadian users involved in the online debate are so adept at leveraging the internet and social networks to their advantage, there's a danger that your voices as Canadian creators and publishers will be drowned out by the chat. Now, leaving aside the fact that the largest print collective in the country has just taken all the people who actually generate the revenues for that collective, tens of millions of dollars a year, people who buy the books and pay the licenses, and called them users who are just engaging in the kind of chatter that might drown out the members of the collective. I think it's actually more noteworthy the very fact that they're saying that users somehow outnumber and are somehow the powerful entity in all of this. If one looks back at copyright reform in the 80s and again in the 90s, users, frankly, were no more than 10,000 or 100,000 years. So it's hard for me to give it a little bit of a here, but I assure you that there are more people here than participated from a user perspective in the 80s and the 90s. And yet here we are, one of the groups that has long been acknowledged as one of the most powerful voices when it comes to copyright-related issues, heralding the warning that somehow users outnumber us and that they're more adept at dealing with this. It's a sea change. And what I wanted to do tonight was talk a bit about what's happened over the last 5 years that would lead a group like Access Copyright to issue that kind of warning, and then talk a little bit about what we can learn from all of that. And so I wanted to start with a brief history of copyright, or the copy fight in Canada. And it's hard to talk about the copy fight at all, or it's at least very tempting to go back to Sir John Thompson, who is not particularly well known in Canada, but he was the fourth Prime Minister of Canada. So I'm going back a long way. Prime Minister back in the 1880s. He's best known to the extent to which he's known time, the only law that we had was one that we got from the British. And Canada, as it had more and more publishers and began to have more and more authors, began to say we needed our own copyright law. But as you may know, at that point in time, we had to go to England to get approval for any new laws. And so Thompson took it upon himself to go to England to argue for a Canadian copyright law. The British said no. So Canada couldn't have its own copyright law in this case, largely because they were in the midst of negotiating a copyright deal with the Americans and saw Canada as a useful bargaining chip as part of that negotiation. They would try to strike a deal with the U.S. and say, not only are you going to get the UK market as part of the deal, we'll give you the Canadians for free. And so it's kind of interesting to see that the same sorts of issues that we see today, and that's not the British that tell us we can't have our own copyright law, skeptics would say it's the Americans. But nevertheless, the same sorts of issues date back literally to the 1880s. Now, if I start from Thompson, though, and continue on, this will turn from an evening talk into a morning talk as well. So I'm actually going to fast forward all the way to 2004, so just the last 5 years, to try to go fairly quickly. And back in 2004 was the last time a Canadian Parliamentary Committee conducted full hearings on copyright-related issues. And I use the word full, but it's a bit of an exaggeration. So the Standing Committee on Canadian Heritage, who was at the time led by Sam Bolton, Toronto area MP, Liberal MP, who was chair of that committee, decided that they needed to look into copyright-related issues and decided to allocate a day, or more accurately a half day, for each issue. So something controversial like ratification of the World Intellectual Property Organization's Internet treaties, they spent about 2.5 hours on it, and then moved on to the next issue, and then the next, and the next. But if you take a look at who even had the opportunity to participate in those hearings, you find that it was wholly one-sided. In fact, there was one day where they were dealing with education-related issues, and one of the MPs turns to a representative of educational institutions and said, you know, you're a bit outnumbered today. At least in that day, there was someone who could be outnumbered, because there were other days where there was nobody representing user-oriented perspectives. And so that's where we were just 5 years ago. It's not really that long ago. And the committee releases a report that becomes known as the Bolton report that is probably as maximalist as you can be. It's certainly exactly what the Americans or certain other groups would love to see Canada do. Now, move forward 1 year later, 2005, and we actually get the first bill that later dies on the order paper. It was Bill C-60, introduced by the Liberals. It wasn't a great bill in comparison to the bill that followed, Bill C-61, by Chief Prentice. It was actually really good. But the bill's introduced, and at the time there are certainly more and more people who are interested and engaged on the issue. But one of the responses that you find are the more traditional academic kinds of responses. So it was actually mentioned in the intro that I edited a book called In the Public Interest, The Future of Canadian Copyright Law, together with 18 other profs from across the country, and we responded to what was found in the bill. If anything made the book noteworthy, it was the fact that it was with a mainstream legal publisher, and we were able to publish it under a Creative Commons license, which was sort of a first, at least for that publisher at that point in time. But it was still pretty standard in terms of the way that we tried to deal with the issues. Fast forward to a few months later, the bill dies on the order paper. We're in the midst of election, and Sam Bolton comes up yet again. So as I mentioned, this is Toronto area MP in Parkdale High Park. And she's seen, naturally enough, as having a particular perspective on copyright. And it comes out